Ja, jag sa teenage, det kan ju han. Sen kunde cheese. Ak AET. Tachanach oe at xati at llengit studel tu. At oeach tu ya ke. Tlak aya wuch in chanes tichi. Ye awe ach has tu in ye jechnean. Ka hanak hasbu art. Keuchne. Khwahinak. Akhwan ish. Shakshani. Kalkhawu. Chukatin. Atlein awe kadena ya has tu in ye jechnean. Say de ya. Tlakawe has tu data ya yutachotank. Wasa has tu tuwasugu. Ka icha tu. Shkate hutsu. Akawe. Ďakuháa, judu sagu at ďakuháa. Golle daat juchagach tutla at yayaki. Ḳutáháa, yes, Táakw ite. Dagún akudzati. Ďakuháa. Ya ḳutáháa owe. Atlein atcha shkadat at adayejedune. Yes. Ya qone qahiti daat yejedune. Aka Táakw. Qone ya kaushakit the cutway day. Ajoy kadenat sa kuch. Ukwat kudach yasat de yach aya kakkish khid. Telach tuashko. Yewe Táakw ḳuhá. Chakut at the wait the kataan ka. Ka Juan would do the teen. We tutat. Shukwa ka Juan itch. Would do the coup. Tsexhaltin, Kahwech, Ishkahaku, a Yanach Linux, a joy we at Ḥaqa aya one qanins, Ḳukaháa shi. Ya Táakw one qanins, at ana joy, ha'ana ka at ana kuch, Ḳuaháa ka, achu at zisku, achu at janmu, tawe. Ya hat chai sakw. Ye awe at tsu. Ya saak ka saak at ye kakwa u. Wash gande kakwa gu. Di aku ye awe ko wash konachwe kusi art. Gandu gu di. Ye gleitin. Ka jinawe katu chu. Aka tleshkeka. Sakwa art. Ye awe lingit would the school. At was school aya yakuti daat. Dakka lingit keka has ausaku we kusi art. Uhan chayeguging eight hini aya eight ka yehayati. One qanins chagut kusi art. Dakka kuna kusi art. Ye awe tatgewe khasatin. Which itch yahas kanashich tawak. Ak aya. Adaye has kautle yich aka adachawi. One qanins wutua has to satu. Ade hasawa shi chutle ihki de yahas kanashich. Helchas tawak. Gah gukt. Gwallach helchwasaku. Degitgia. Ha'ani dachaya has kautle yich. Ichde. Sedaqida. Nashiye away. Hasya kanashich. Táakw. Ya Hawaii ate. Kolea yudo sa kasu yukatangitin. Ye awe khoach dekitgia tawak ini has outlitsin. Aka awe wait tawak ikide has kautle yich. Ye awe hakosti. Ya ʻaʻatsu ya ha'ani kuk tesha tuashku ataswu ati Táakw. We yatsinate ʻaʻhutsi duasago at katsik. Katuk hasta ku tut aya hasna tage Tāakw Hicht aya haswutlitik Táakw aya haswutla has yatsin Yesu likudzi. Táakw gwalhin jagutatsu. Ya Táakw oe dleit wan qanins qatla. Atayich aya hasa keewáa kutzin kakak. Hassu da kakach jakut kaututitseko hastu dachawu. Kutan aya tsakwat yatee. Táakw aya dleit yatee. Ye awe achtawasaku yi inyuqachtatani. Jakutatsu qone aya sa hinde ana atch shatsin kach. Gwal dakun Táakw hihin te sa hinde chwagud. Achtawasaku tsu keewáa ya Táakw. Gwal te dushu Táakw keewáa yakda. Keshwe hini, wan qanins hini aya hinde yana ana atch. Hastu ani kakha kanadayihin kakha nachawe saat. We saatihin gwal I shuj shatsin kach. Yewe shingil kusti kaltige nache kakigud kaltige nach. Yedlet ka wan qanins hastu tundatani just akade kakwashkain like kusti ya kaltige nache kakigud. Ya jaltakat at away ya kalyasi. Kakidgang hashagun hashagenya jaltakat at yewe tundatani ya yedat gunalchisha khiti sa akhi. Gwalli tuasagu yuqiwatani Táakw daat yes.
Oslegus kusi at achoe hat would fetch and I'm sad.
Kakao jakit tsu kakit yeah. Go ayakwan. Wan qanin so it's in ayach katawasagu qayat ikautagan. Sagu it's ina wan qanin so do sagu. Okay. Let's walk through it. Gotta remember what I talked about. What was I talking? I was talking about last stuff.
I thought you said it was snowing at some point.
Yeah, I was talking about snow.
Daat.
When there's deep snow, you get these little critters that run around underneath it. I think about that because I walk my dog and she's really good, I guess. I don't know, probably hears them and smells them. She'll just pounce and stuff her nose in. Doesn't do anything with them, but I think it's just real curious. Cat hates the snow but loves to kill mice. Dog loves the snow but doesn't mess with mice at all. Probably just sniffs them out. I don't know.
You started off talking the book and talking about everyone's work that went into it and the list of all the names.
Yeah, I was talking about the seasons, the type of work that people do. So Ďakuháa, I thought about this too. Let me see. I think it's this one I call. I guess it is. Achadi. Shilkat. Let's see. So ʻyaḥkuhá. I don't want to get too much into this because I'll forget all the things I said. But I do want to talk about this. So you've got Táakw kutan yes Táakw, and then ʻyaḥkuhá. So what are those things? Seasons, right? So ʻyaḥkuhá means it keeps, the time keeps arriving. That's what it really means. Like it keeps arriving, right? And so then what is Táakw?
Summer.
Spring.
Spring. Kutan,
Summer.
summer. Yes, fall. Táakw,
Winter.
winter, right? So as I was talking, I was thinking about this stuff. In the summer, people work on foods. In the fall, people, it's kind of ḳuhá, gāwūtse. It's ḳuhá season. Also, people start getting their houses ready for the winter, start getting, all the stuff you got to do to get ready for the snow and everything. And then in the winter, both in the fall and winter, there's a lot of hunting. I was thinking a lot, I was working on this kind of field guide I'll put on our class page. It was basically like a little booklet that just shows pictures of all these different animals, and they're kind of in these categories. So the categories are like these weasel things, like the whole bunch of these that are just all relatives. And then there's the hoofed ones. Like what are all the hoofed ones that are on Tlingit territory? Anybody know? Can we say them in Tlingit? ḳuhá, Janmu,
This
Zisk. There's probably one more. It's inland. So with my kids, I would go, ḳuhá. Or I'd go, Zisk, ḳuhá, Watsik, Janmu, Tawe. Right, so I would just really do these motions with, and those are they're relatives, right? Because they got hooves, they got horns, right? So that's what links them. Gwaintli is the hoof, and Shady is the horn. So Watsik is a caribou. So those are the five that are sort of on our territory. So I think about them because they're really in season at that time of year, and even if you're not a hunter, it's important in Tlingit vocabulary and thought world. Like that's traditionally like what we used to go for. And then you get seals and sea lions and stuff like that. So I was talking about the weather, and I was talking about it gets colder. The roads get slick, so I slid a couple times today. It was interesting. Every year when that first happens, I'm like, oh yeah, I can't drive the same way, can't be top speed the whole time. So drive careful, I don't want you to slide off the road. Or I think they call it wushketyautagu, for cars to crash into each other. So don't want any car accidents, anything like that. So everybody drive safe. Give yourself lots of time to get places these days, especially when you got like fog and I don't know. This morning it seemed like it was extra slippery. What else? So I was saying, yeah. So then I was talking about migrating birds. So Tatke, Khwasatin, Awak, Wuch Itch, Yahas, or Wuch Itch, Haskaudli Yich. Do we know all those parts? Tatke, yesterday. Khwasatin, Awak, Wuch Itch, together, following, Haskaudli Yich. Multiple things to fly. We're going to get to motion verbs. They're the funkiest verbs. They're like so funky. They got all the cool things. But one of the things is they tend to change once you pluralize it. So yandakin would be one. Yakanachich would be, yahaskanachich would be multiple. So I saw these geese flying in a row. And daat haskautli yich kagwash ichte. Daat haskautli yich gwash ichte.
From around Auk Lake and then probably south.
Yes, right? So I think about that, because then there's birds that leave, right? And I was trying to think of the birds that leave. Tawak, Qukl, Shach, maybe? Do they stick around or they go? Anybody know? Any bird people?
Ducks fly. Is that?
Gach, Gitgiya. Yewecho acho de Gitgiya tlech ichte has kawul yich. Tawak ini has outlets in. You know that one?
Is like armpit, right?
Yes.
Do the hummingbirds tuck up with the Canada geese or something like that?
Like I heard they hide in their armpits and that's how they migrate. That's kind of fun to say. There's a Raven story about like a lady who had feathers out of her armpits. And then when Raven plucked them out, they became flickers. And he threw them at his uncle's face. It was his uncle's wife. We're translating that story. I was like, okay, it sounds like armpit feathers. I don't understand why. It was like that's how the story goes. Yeah. Okay. I think that's. At the beginning, I was saying I'm really happy that when we study Tlingit, I'm happy when we come together. It's good stuff. Oh, I thought a lot. There was a list of names. There was all these people that I used to talk to and that who taught me stuff. So I said, Keewáa. Anybody know that one? Nora Downhauer. Ḥuáineach. Who was hanging out with Nora Downhauer all the time? Richard Downhauer. Káhuan. I better talk about these people more. George Davis.
George Davis.
Yeah, what? Shikshani. March Stetson. Táakw. Cyril George. Shkateh.
Jesse John.
Yeah, what? Jesse Johnny. I didn't mention Kasech. I should have said Kasech.
Lena Everton.
Yes, she was so amazing, so wonderful. Jukatine. James March. And I think I also said Seydeya. Mary Anderson. Also Ḳukaháa. And, but I think about them a lot because whenever I'm teaching folks, I think, wow, I wonder what they would want me to teach people. Then I think about that kind of stuff a lot. I think about them, I think about the conversations that we had, which for some of them, like, think about talking with Johnny Marks and Paul Jackson and others, Walter Soboleff. Like when I was speaking with them, like I knew a lot less Tlingit than I know now, which is always like, I wish I had known then what I know now. Like Sonny Clay and Rod Stewart said. But then I think about that stuff as I start talking to you folks in Tlingit and sharing knowledge and stuff. Okay, any language thoughts or questions? Stuff you're thinking about?
In the dictionary, it says that a comet is ḥudzi and it fell is Táakw. So would a meteor shower be ḥudzi Táakw, or would you word it differently? Because there's a meteor shower tonight.
Ooh, I guess I would say Táakw. And then there's another word for it when it's also called keewáa zunayi, which I should put up because zuna is a great word because I have a cat named Shuna, which Marge Detson came up with that name. And sometimes I'll call her Shuna the Zuna because I want to throw her like a missile. Not really, I wouldn't really do it, but she's an insane cat and sometimes I get frustrated. So let's look at, I think we looked at keewáa in here before. Did we look at that word? Anybody remember that? Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. So we're going to scroll down to keewáa. Keewáa. So keewáa is way up high, right? So these directional things, it's really interesting, right? Because you have kinde, which is upwards. You have ʼakina, which would be above me. Then you have deki, which is way up high. And then you've got keewáa, which is as high as you can get. But also, like, in Tlingit, we got names for the moon, the stars, and stuff, so we understand a lot about how that stuff works. Like, our language was not allowed to be included in all these conversations about learning about a whole bunch of stuff about the world. So there's some terminology that we need to employ and get caught up on. But keewáa is like way up in the heavens. And some of the stuff gets into Tlingit spirituality, so believe what you want to believe, but here's how the old way of thinking works. So when we talk about keewáa, I think we have to jump down to keewáa. And keewáa would be the heavenly people. Now this is people who were killed in battle or people who killed themselves. So keewáa are these people who ascend to this different place. Like, so the way that Tlingit, I think, thought about a lot of this stuff is there was reincarnation, right? So a lot of times when someone passed away, they would come back. Sometimes people who were into medicinal things would come back as a spirit helper for a medicine person. Sometimes people would ascend and go to this place we call daatánk or daatánk, which is the happy hunting grounds, right? So that's like the Tlingit concept of like what heaven would kind of be. But then there's keewáa, where some people who die a pretty extreme death, they end up going there. And sometimes we see them in the Northern Lights, which a couple of pro tips: don't whistle at night and don't look at red Northern Lights. Like, those are things that I've been told. Also, don't look at a whale tail when it goes down the water. It will take your vision. But so when we talk about keewáa, so we've been starting to use, and I'll probably put it in here, keewáa, which would be, and I guess it should be keewáa, which would be the heavenly women, which is the term we want to probably use for missing and murdered Indigenous women, because it's such a thing that I think it does need its own term. But then we get into some interesting sort of things like keewáa k'chechi, which means the shadow of the heavenly being. And that is a word for an eclipse. And an eclipse for Tlingit peoples was a scary thing. So we thought if you looked at it, you would turn to stone. Also, if you looked at Raven turned people to stone all the time. The other thing is keewáa yahai, and this is a term for people who are born with some disabilities, right? So these are nowadays called autism, a variety of different sort of mental capacity disabilities. And I think it's a beautiful term. It means the image of the heavenly people. So this word yahai, it is related to yakwahayaqu. They both have the same verb in it, which is ha, which means to move imperceptibly. That's what that verb root refers to. The term yahai can mean a reflection, a shadow, a photograph, or a ghost of something, right? And so it's a really interesting term when we start to get to it, and because it just means something that is moving, the thing that's moving along with it, perhaps. And then ʼyakwahēyaku means that yahayi is going to be removed. That's what the word, like ʼyakwahēyaku is a complicated term. There's a spirit in everything. There's a spirit in everything. That's why we give respect to all things. But that yakwa, so there's a future, kukwa, like you were going to spot these future things. Like remember we're talking about gachtu. We are gonna. When you get kukwa, third person gonna, or it's just gonna happen, right? We'll learn how to spot these things. And so you got ʼyakwahēyaku. So sometimes when you close this double A verb root, because the verb root here is ha, same verb. Too many to count. Moves too much. Can't count it. Go ahead, try and count the stars. Can't do it. But when you close this it switches to ei. So you go from yaha to you yahake, or something like that, right? So a couple more is keewáa zuna or zunayi. So the verb root zun means to throw something as a missile. So think it's got a bunch of verbs for throwing things, because there's just certain things where, certain types of verbs where think it is like, let's do categories then. Swimming, like let's look at swimming, and then we'll look at throwing. And these are examples. So when we get to swimming, you got, I think, 3 pages of verbs, right? Which is funny because most like old school thinking people I know don't swim, right? So, but we're like, those things swim. They swim in all these different ways, right? So the first one is to touch, right? And so we always keep in mind, like this dictionary writes things a little bit different than we do now. We would write D plus 0 root marker touch. Anybody know what this touch verb root is? So sometimes when you teach your siblings things, you can be kind of mean to them. I'm not giving you permission to, I'm just saying that's how things work. So I told my little brother, he's like, yeah, teach me ʼatánk. I was like, okay, here's your first word. Touch. He's like, what's that? And then I slapped him in the face. Not real hard. Then I said later, touch, and he goes like that. I was like, see, you're learning. So touch does mean to slap, right? So you might have heard in beginning tlingit, yichin tuck night touch. Slap your hands together. That's how you say clap, clap. So this is for people to swim, and it means slap the water, right? It's very literal. So then there's a plural version. We're not going to worry too much about it. Just know that it exists. Then there's to swim someone ashore, like if they're in trouble and you got to go rescue them. Then you get ʼatánk, which is for things to swim underwater. Most people would think of fish once you heard this verb, right? A single thing to swim underwater. It would work for anything that swims underwater, though. Killer whales, seals, a person. It works for a person, right? Then there's a plural version of that. Then you get heen, which is for a school of fish to swim together. A little bit different, right? Not as, because you can have plural fish, like one fish, two fish, whatever. But now you get a school of fish, different verb. They're school swimming. Then you get your woohoo verb. There it is, woohoo. And this is the dog paddle or wading in the water. Could be either one. So this is whenever you talk about a beaver swimming or something like that, a deer, they would all go under this category. And me, I'm not a very good swimmer. That's how I swim. I'm like, just don't die, right? And then there's a plural for that, right? So that would be for a set of them to do that. This is one I don't think there's a good English equivalent for. This is like a duck that just meanders on the water, like just moving around like little paddle, 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 paddle with their little paddles, right? Judlihu or juduhu. And then you've got a plural version of that. You've got a bird to swim on the surface and a plural of that. Because the birds, when they swim, it's not quite, they're kind of like, what do you call it? What's it called when a bird, like a duck, just moves around on the water? What is that called? Scooting? What?
I would say swimming. Swimming, sitting on the water, but then when they move around.
Right, because they just sit. They're so lucky. I can't just sit on the water and just kick my feet and just float around. But there's a thing of verb. We got a verb for that, right? That's one I think doesn't translate very well.
Like a booty.
So then you get yatee, and this verb means to poke your face into something. That's what it means. So yatee is used for like a seal emerging from the water. Like sometimes they go boom, boom, boom. There's a type of, I think there's a type of swimming where you do that. I don't know about swimming. And then this yatee, that would be to poke your face through an open window. ʼatánk yatee. Duchet yatee. Poke your face to their mouth. That's kissing. Share that with someone. She said, that's why I married an Inupiat. I think I don't know about kissing. They ain't got good verbs for it. Let me poke my face into your mouth, right? I was like, yeah, probably. But it also works for ducking and putting your head up, right? I had to learn this with my kids because I'd say, kinde anashqin. And they would open their eyes and look. Now the shampoo goes in their eyes because I'm saying, look up. So then I say, kinde yatee, and then they go like that without opening their eyes, which just means poke your face up. Okay? And then there's a plural of that, of course. There's to swim fast, especially of a sea mammal. So this one works really well for seals when they're really, or like if you've ever hunted sea otters, like once they know you're coming, they will fly through the water. And they're usually going boom, boom, with these diving motions, right? There's a plural for that. Then there are sea mammals to swim in a school, especially killer whales. So this is your potting verb. And this one is also for boats or cars to go together in a group. So there's a song, Ye ya yanagwin he de kit e yanagwin, right? Ya yanagwin. They are, here come the killer whales, right?
So the goo becomes Gwain.
Yes. So when you close ah, it becomes a. When you close oo, it becomes way. And those are the only two that changed. And this is why, what do you call like a student? Anybody know what you call a student? There's schoonwan. There's another term, yes. That means like school man. There's another term. Ya at nasqueni, right? So where does ya at nasqueni come from? Ya at anasquain. They're getting to know it, right? Ausiku. Ya anasquain.
So goo becomes Gwain and Koo becomes Gwain. I didn't quite catch what transition.
Yes, ku becomes queen.
Koo becomes
And so, like if they wipe the table, aushiku, and what do they wipe it with?
Gwain.
Buena, right? There's another one. Okay.
I found this on the web.
Oh, ganchish. Okay. Okay. Oh, and so I said we are going to do swimming. What was the other one I said we are going to do? Throwing. Then we'll take our break. We got categories 4,000. Okay. So throwing, I think, doesn't have as many. But like swimming, like we live on the ocean, right? Swimming is, even if we're not big swim, like I do think a long time ago, plenty of people swam because there's stories about swimming competitions, right? But I think a lot of modern Tlinkits are sinkers, not swimmers. That's just my biased perspective. Like my wife's family is from a place where they swim all the time. They saw me and they're like, "Is he dying?" It's like, I'm just trying not to, actually. Okay. So you have generally throwing something, which is beach, right? Also, there's some lakes you don't throw rocks into. I was in Tessin. I was just taking a break and throwing rocks. I came back in and said, "You shouldn't have done that. Bring bad weather." And what do you think happened? Bad weather. It was just bright sunshine. I felt so bad. Okay. So then you can get like some variation on here. There's a noun on this one, sh, which means the end of something. So it depends on how that's being used. Like you could say shuwahih, it died off, it ran to its end. But you could say shuwaqich, or shuwaqich, I guess it would be, I held one end and I threw the other. So that'd be like holding onto a net and throwing one side of it. So qich is another way to throw things. Oh, so qich is plural objects, whoops. Qich is a single solid object. Kayaqich would be a round solid object, or just a round object. Khich would be throwing a living thing. Kate, gant our khich. So that could substitute, right? You could say, Táakw, gant our khich. She threw her man out, right? And it could work like that. You could say, gant khich, I got thrown out, right? Maybe we're kind of trying to come up with a name for a bouncer, and it was like throws people outside. Then you've got throwing liquid. Then you've got throwing things with such force that they scatter. In case you're wondering which verb to use for running around town, throwing all your money around, that's the one. Guk is to hurl against something, to throw like a spear. And then you could also throw a stick where you're trying to get the end to hit something, right? And then you've got zu, which is to throw something as a missile. And then you can also have, you can put sh on it, which means I threw it as a missile to hit something in the head, right? And then you can throw something, an egg was thrown at their head. Quatch, shautut zu. So, we're starting to wander into Tlingit verbs a little bit more now and then, just to sort of say, look at all this stuff. There's a reason why it gets its whole own dictionary, right? It's the heart of the language. And it's complicated, I'm not going to lie about it, although I usually say fun and interesting, right? But there's only so many things, right? It absolutely is predictable. There's a few components that are maybe unpredictable, but most of the parts of the verb are totally predictable. Like you will learn, just like we did that possessive suffix, right? It looked really super complicated when you talk about how it works. But once you start using it, you're like, okay, I see it now, right? Rounded end is going to be a U. Same with the verb. There are a lot of complexities to it, but we're going to start to unpack those a little bit at a time, because we're starting to get to the point where once we get to these direction location things, there's not a whole lot left in the language that's not a verb, right? So nouns, the direction location stuff, we're going to learn there's some particles and other things like that that we'll sort of keep learning about. And then we're going to start getting more and more into verbs. But then at this point of Tlingit learning, we start like doing some structural stuff, talking about how it works, learning some new things, starting to learn how like, this is how you digest a verb. This is how you internalize a tlingit verb so you know how it works. But then we got to start looking at whole language with speeches and stories and stuff so that we don't get stuck in this little tiny particle land. Any questions about any of that? Okay.
In Táakw, there was a verb for about hitting repeatedly in the head with a club. And is hitting things in the head the only body part you can add onto the verb, or is there like other ones that happen? Or is it just the head that always gets hit repeated or hit and often repeatedly?
That's an interesting question, right? So I'm going to look up club so we can see this verb that you're talking about. So here is club, and it is shawachisht,
Yeah.
right? I think you could, because you could put pretty much any body part you want to on a verb. Like it is possible. And you could get pretty fancy with that. You could club someone in the foot, you could club someone in the arm. But my experience is usually you would just say the body part and then go back to, because you could, this verb you could say achisht, which would be just whipping. Most people would think of whipping or spanking with that one. Because usually if you're clubbing something not in the head, it's usually for some form of punishment. Like it's an unusual thing, I think, to hit something with a club, not in the head. So like clubs are made for killing, right? Like,
Right. Well, like there's like the phrase in like English, like taking someone out by the knees.
mm-hmm. Yeah, so then you would probably say, because you could say ki, like ki, you could put ki onto a verb. I think most people wouldn't know that that's what you're doing, so you would just say do ki chisht. They're clubbing their knees. And so, because usually with this verb, your intention is usually to kill or to knock unconscious. Right? Like,
Right.
this, but you like, when you're clubbing salmon, like you're taking them out so that you can clean them up and eat them, right? And so when you have verbs like this, the only time you do have some verbs where you get like other body parts in there. Like ek shakaut nash is to go like that with your finger, right? And so ek is built in there, and so is sha. Like it means to make the head of your finger go back and forth like that. That's what the verb is literally saying. But outside of that, I think you usually get mouth, but it's usually not always talking about the mouth.
Probably. I guess like maybe throat, like bleeding something out.
There is decapitate. That doesn't get a head. Where is it? Is it on cut?
Wait, it's hunting time.
So here's, cutting is another good one. So, or breaking is another really good one. Where is it? Because that one has the base of the neck. So the base of the neck is on there because that's usually where you cut the head off.
Right. That's what it's.
Okay. Okay, come back at quarter till and we'll shift gears a little bit. Sheesh. We had some good questions over the break, so I guess I should share some of these notes real quick. We did talk about a meteor shower, so we do have chudzi, yaushagas, so that's in the verb dictionary. So it means to arc, to move across the sky in like an arcing motion, I think. So then you could add dach in front of the verb to pluralize. It's a non-human pluralizer. We had another question about achtu yatee and just where the tone marks are, which is interesting because last night in advanced Tlingit, we did a whole bunch of stuff with the yatee verb, which I'll just show you real quick. So what we were sort of talking about here is if you can learn how to conjugate this one verb, yatee, you could say a whole bunch of different things. Colors, needing, caring about. There's like a whole bunch of things that you could do, being a certain way. So we were showing like how yatee, you could say that's how it is that way, or they are that way. Yechat yatee, yeha yatee, ye yatee, ye yatee, ye has yatee, ye ka yatee. What did we just do?
That's how I am.
That's how I
That's
am.
how we are. That's
We
how
are.
you are. That's how you all are. That's how they are.
They all are.
That's how people are.
Right? So then we showed you could change that object. There's an object right there, you could change it. There's a list of them. That's almost all of them. There's a couple other ones. We're not going to worry about that. The negative of yatee is kech ye ute. Right? Just to show you, when it goes negative, that verb will change. Right? To go perfective, which means it happened, it goes to wu-tee. But then we can still change that object. Ye chat-wu-tee, ye ha-wu-tee, ye e-wu-tee, ye yi-wu-tee, ye has-wu-tee, ye ka-wu-tee. What's interesting about changing the object first is it's the first thing that you say or hear, but it also affects the verb the least. Because you can see it's still wu-tee all the way down. If you start changing subjects, it's going to be a different story because it's built a little bit closer to the classifier. And then kleshye-wu-tee would be it wasn't that way. Now we could go future. Yekwati. A lot of us have said that, right? But it's just like it's a chant, right? Right? And for a lot of people, there's just a lot of thinking people like, I don't know, it's just what you say when they say that thing. But yekwati means it will be that way. And what we are going to learn is that yekwati is made up of ga, ka, 0, t. And the secret is right there. Ga, ka is future. Every single time. Every future verb must have these three things in it. That's why you get gahtu, that's why you get kuka, that's why you get kukwa. And so once we get further into the verb, we'll find about contraction. How does contraction work? It's very predictable. There's a lot of moving parts, sure. It's very predictable. So here you get yekwati, yechatkukwati, yehakwati, yeekwati, yeyikwati, yehaskukati. Two different ways to say it. What's the driving factor for which one you use? Is it going to be gukati or kukwati?
It's like if the thing preceding it is closed or not.
Yes. If there's a vowel before it, it will say, you gotta contract, bro. Consonants, like, nah, be yourself. Right? Because a vowel before it just acts like it's part of the verb. And we're going to get to this thing. Huayinak used to call it the 3 strikes and you're out rule. He said once you get more than 3 things, there will be contraction. And by 3, I mean from the root to going that way. Right? And a 0 thing doesn't count. That's not a thing. It doesn't make a sound, so it doesn't affect anything. Then we did a hortative, which was let it be that way, right? Yenqati. Similar thing. Look at the ones that end with a consonant as opposed to the vowel. Yechatnaqati, yehanqati, yeinqati, yeyinqati, yehasnaqati, yeqanqati. Some of those are kind of weird sounding because it's very strange to say, let you be that way. But you can say it. Okay. And then there's a command form, yatee. and ye yatee. But what we were showing, like if you could do these, right? This is one of my favorite Tlingit phrases. I learned it from Daakw. Her name was Winnie Atlin. She was a lot of fun to speak Tlingit to. And she would say, Saku in yenkati. So you got joy, your, with, let it be that way. So now there's parts in there that you could change. Saku hastu in yenkati. Let joy be with them. You can also change the sagu. Shachait in yenkati. Let good fortune be with you. Right? Okay. There's a time jump.
Are you going to include these notes in our notes?
Sure, I will combine the notes. Oh. What else? Oh, we did some other things too. We did nachtu. Okay. We're in hortative territory in advanced Tlingit. It's a lot of fun. But I will say nachtu is the hortative form, not for all verbs, for some of them, for let us, like nachtu ad, let's go. So I was trying to name lettuce, like the vegetable, nachtu, because that is funny to me. Nobody stop me. No, not yet. Okay. Questions? Everybody okay?
Khune.
Oh, Dasa?
I have a question. So thank you for sharing the be verb. I've been wondering about that. Also, when it comes to putting an adjective with a noun to make a very simple descriptive sentence, I mean, this is something we do in English a lot, but like to say the road is dangerous, for example. I'm looking at the Tlingit adjective list. If we want to put a noun with an adjective to make a sentence, do we need yatee, or is there enough verb action going on in the noun and adjective?
So Tlingit most of the time will want to use a verb. But you can have an adjective for some things, right? So for example, if I go back to the verb dictionary and I go look up dangerous, right? So dangerous is ḳuhá. So now I could say anything is dangerous, right? You see there, hoots ḳuhá. This is a complicated verb, and it can be chit or chait. If you are from Cake or Wrangell or Prince of Wales, maybe Teslin, it'll be chit. Everywhere else, it'll be chait. And ḳuhá means dangerous or scary. So if you're going to say something is dangerous or scary, that's the preferred term. And it's interesting because it has this shun on it, which sometimes pops up as shun, sometimes pops up as chun, and it pops up at the end of a verb, which means it easily becomes that way, which is interesting because if we go look up this verb root chit, we'll see that it has its own slightly different meaning. So we go down here, chit, to be afraid of something, right? So then we go back up and we look at afraid, and then, those are different colors. So then we get achkeitlich, akeitlechit. So that means to be afraid of something, right? This is also a great conversation, because I hear a lot of people when they start learning Tlingit, they learn a phrase like atskani, and they want to use that like a verb. They're like, atskani yewune. It's like, no, you can't do that. Because atskani is, that's what it is. So you have to switch it to a verb, which is all part of the learning process. It's like, I think it's really good as you're learning to speak Tlingit to sometimes avoid verbs, like achjiwu, ijiwu, dujiwu, right? No verb. But then you're going to have to get into the verbs at some point. And for when I was learning Tlingit, this yellow dictionary was all we had that talked about verbs. So we would look stuff up and we would say akit, but we're trying to say like I'm scared, but we didn't know how to do that, right? And so here you would mark like this letter, capital letter A, in this case is marking what you are afraid of. So this one is in the current verb database. So I'll show you folks. Let me close some tabs real quick. I need to know that. Oh, let me close all of the tabs. Okay. So switching back to here, and let me switch and then zoom way in. Oops. So we're going to go down to chait here. And then I'll come back to your question because I might have just launched into my own personal thoughts on everything. So now we get afraid or fear. So now this is written differently, right? Capital N, here's that thing that we just learned to be at somewhere. A, ka, u, capital S, D plus L, root marker, chait, little thingy right there. Let's talk through what every one of these things is telling us. For S, to be afraid of, fear, N. So the capital S is what?
Subject.
The subject, right? So it tells you that is going to be a subject pronoun. Cha, tu, I, ye, nothing, du, right? Those are your options. Those are your only options. And that means, so if I put cha in here, I am the one who's afraid. I put tu, we are afraid. Of N. Capital N, what does that stand for?
Noun.
A noun. Put any noun you want in there, right? And in this case, they're all saying right? So this is your command form. Be afraid of it, right? This was the one I used with Saul Neely. We said, decolonization. I ain't afraid of it. That was like our little, we made little t-shirts or something with it. I can't remember. So now here you come in and then you start to use it as a verb. And so a similar thing, like when I was saying earlier, the roads are slippery. For Tlingit, that is going to be a verb, right? So we're going to go look up slippery and we'll go see what's in here. And then we can come back to the verb database, right? So as we're learning Tlingit, we keep going into the dictionary, figuring out what the root is, go into the verb database so we can start to sort of commit these things to memory, because you will remember. It's scary. It's a kind of a complicated verb, but or no, it's sorry. That's how it is every time. It's scary, it's scary, it's scary. Or it's dangerous. I'll look up slippery then, go back to So we go down here. It's getting close. Slippery. Rumbling in the building. Okay. Herd of buffaloes just came over us. Not a big deal. Okay. So okay. So some of these things, like when you, now that you have this verb, right? We each is how you say it is slippery. We day. That road is slippery. Right? So now you could talk about other things, like you have that verb right there. Okay.
What does the KW mean?
It means right now. And so there are some things where, like, when you talk about right now, it just gets, most commonly that KW means it's a bunch of little motions in what that make up one single act. Like, ċaħitku, I'm sweeping it. Okay. Did I answer the question?
What was the question?
It was about adjectives, right?
Can I try another one? Like,
Ask me
okay.
another question and I'll talk for a while. How's that? Yes, let's try another one.
Like the Edwards verb database has pronouns, but what if we want to say the book is funny? In English, that's the is verb. But how do we connect adjectives to nouns to make a sentence? That's
Yeah.
my question.
Okay, so
does it depend on every verb or noun?
well, I have a short answer for this one. Okay. So the short answer is and this is actually really a timely thing. It's good timing. So for example, we had learned a lot about this relational suffix, right? This whole set of rules about how it works. So then you say becomes ach, what? I forget. Anybody remember? Yagu, right? There's a whole set of rules. And one of those important rules is the tone of the suffix is opposite of what's before it. But there's this other thing, like here's some state verbs. I'm trying to think of one other low one. I can't think of one. Okay. Here's 4 of them. Do we know what they mean? Well, they are state verbs, which means they are that way right now. Yeah, so they are, we're going to use they for all of them. Dirty, right? So every one of these is a state verb, right? They are all state verbs. One of the common things, there are 2 things that are very common about state verbs. They usually use objects, and they usually are g conjugation. That will factor in later when you start to realize more about what that really means. But for each of these, I can put that same, it's a different suffix. It's called the attributive suffix. How fun is that? And it doesn't really matter what it's called. What this suffix does is it turns a verb into an adjective. It follows every single one of the rules except the tone rule. This one is always low. So you'll say kitsini. We'll use a cat. So what would that be? We have converted that verb into an adjective.
Strong cat.
Strong cat. And we could do it for every one of these, right? Good cat. Stinky cat.
Smelly cat.
Yeah, smelly cat. Dirty cat, right? So this is something that you can learn how to do. And it's a pretty straightforward process, especially if you have a state verb, you add that suffix to it, and now it becomes that type of thing. This works really well, right, for shinget. So you could have shushkeyi, it's an evil thing. Yakeyi, it's a good thing. That is one easy way you can convert these. And I will share, since we're sort of talking about this, there is a list here of adverbs and adjectives. So adjectives modify a noun, adverbs modify a verb. When it comes to adjectives for Tlingit, you have two different types. What are those types?
Adjectives? There's two different types.
Yes. What are they doing
It's
upstairs?
the aftershock.
It's, I think it's the click footsteps.
Oh yeah, so there's something exciting going on. They love adjectives up there. Like tuchja for adjectives. Tuchja is the sound of stamping feet.
As somebody who lived in Anchorage for a very long time, it immediately makes me think of
Earthquakes. Yeah. Okay, back to two different times.
Before the noun and after the noun.
Yeah away. Yeah away. So like a true adjective for Tlingit, there's ones that come before, one that comes after. Okay, when you see that dash, that means that tells you where the noun goes. Ish is a Ḥukaháa Tlingit name. That means good father. Ātánk, cake, lots of dogs. Táakw, people of long ago. And then you get some of these that add this chun, or sometimes it's going to be tsun. You get variations on it. It's really interesting. But it means it's easy for, it like verbs easily, right? Tempting to steal, sold easily, washes easily, right? Some of them are kind of unusual. They're not used a whole lot, but that's why you get that ḳuhá. It scares people. That's what it kind of means. So some of these, like kasayeyi, that one's kind of fun. It pops up in front of like a thermos. It's kasayeyi gukha. It's a strange cup. It keeps things warm or cold. Kasayeyi qanch is strange tobacco. That's the word for sativa, is that what we're calling it now? Weed. And then you have some that come after, right? Some of them are kind of unusual. Like for something to be egg-shaped, I've never heard anybody use that one. It does exist. Katsku is used quite a bit. And then we get to kishuku. So shuk is the verb root for laughing or smiling. So we'll probably look at this, maybe we'll look at it next week. Because there's a bunch of different little subtle variations between like laughing, laughing at, making fun of, smiling, smiling at. But then there's khishuk, which means make something laugh. So I could say khatti khishuk, you made me laugh. Or I could say ich khishuk, I made you laugh. So then you take that khishuk and you use the same thing and you get khishuku. That means it's a funny thing. So you could say khishuku khukh. It's a funny book. Khishuku shkashnik. It's a funny story. But for like joke, I've heard atshuk yuchatangi. But I'll put this up. So this has a whole bunch of them on here. Then when we get into adverbs are different than adjectives because verbs are just they do so much more than nouns and Tlingit, right? So like the adjectives it's gonna modify the noun. It's gonna make it there's not a whole lot to it in terms of how it works. Okay. I'm really good at answering questions tonight. I just feel like I'm just really nailing it answering questions.
Yeah,
Just so if I'm to say the book is funny, I don't need to add yatee.
No, I wouldn't add yatee. And so But I noticed when I first started speaking more and more Tlingit, I always wanted to do that. Or I'd say, kasagu yewuti. But I'm like, it was fun. I could just say, kausagu. So I would want to use a verb, but then use yatee or wuti because Tlingit, I mean, English does that, right? Is, was. And so yatee is not is, and wuti is not was, right? It's like to be and it was being, right? And so I think it is, because once we learn how to go yatee wuti, we're like, I got it. Now I could do all these different things, but you're kind of faking it if you just keep throwing yatee and wuti in there, right? But instead, it's because then you could say, wutleshuk. It made me laugh, or it made someone laugh, right? Kausagu, it was fun. Good question.
She helpful. Thank
Okay, let's get back to our squirrel for last few minutes. Okay, so the squirrel went different places, right? Let's just go back. Here we are. Good day, saya na good. Iqte, yeah, oh, iqte ya na good. Iqte ya na good. Good day, saya na good. You did call. Daqte ya na good. Daqte ya na good. Daqte ya na good. So the next thing we are gonna look at is some of these change when you put a suffix on. You go from dak to dakte. That's just what happens. It goes short and high. And same with if you, well, good day say na kuch. So now it's kuchen. Dakte na kuch. Dakte na kuch. Dakte na kuch. Now you gotta really watch your dak and your dak. Because if you tell someone, dakte nagu, and then they start walking out in the water, you did that. But they do the same thing. Dak, dakte. Dak, dakte. Dak, dak. Dak, dak. They are in opposition to each other. Okay. So we've been doing a whole bunch of this stuff. We're looking at all these different parts of Tlingit. Okay, there's a noun. That's the name of something. There's a suffix that can attach to a noun. There's an adjective that can modify a noun. There's a body part, and a body part is different, right? Because when we say like, ach gukayi, ach kuhidayi, ach kuku. So once we put ach in front of it, now it gets a suffix. Ach jin, ach qeq, ach chik, ach jiqi. Right? Those don't. Ach sha. They do get a possessive marker though, that relational marker, if they get removed. That's why you have, there's names like Quch, Shayi. So Quch, Shayi follows all of these rules that we've been talking about, right? So what do we got here? Quch, Shayi.
The wolf head.
Wolf head. What does it look like if we take that suffix off of there?
Oh,
How am I going to spell it? What's the vowel going to be? And?
the head.
Right? Sha. So that is, sha. It is a short high vowel, but if we put that suffix on there, it stretches it long and low, just like we learned, right? So we will see this stuff all over the place, right? So those are body parts. And body parts can have body parts, right? Do we know that? Ek, eksha, chik, or chik, chiksha, he, kisha, right? So body parts can have body parts. Land, well, what's that? Yeah, my daughter used to say her foot fingers because they're called ḳuskek.
Tell us a story about when you're naming body parts and then the people would say the tips of the body part.
Yes, okay, so sometimes we do this, especially like we used to sit in circles, I don't know, and we would just send this thing around. I do this sometimes. I'll say, oh, let's do it. What have we not done it? Do we do plants in here? Okay, plant challenge. Tuesday, come ready to name as many plants as you can. That includes berries, trees, everything. We're going to see how many times we can send it around. Well, we would send this thing around, right? And we'd do plants, we'd do land animals, water animals, and one day we did body parts. And so we did body parts, and someone was pretty new to learning Tlingit. They said, could I just jump into intermediate Tlingit? I was like, you try? Go ahead. And so they knew that body parts could have body parts. A lot of them have sha. And so as it was going around, it just worked out great. So someone said, ʼatánk, and then that person said, ʼatánk sha. I was like, oh, that's pretty clever. And I went around, the person next to them said, ʼatki sha. And then I think the person next to them caught on to what they were doing. So when it came around that time, looked it dead in the eyes. So my penis. And so it's like, stop this right. So everybody laughed. The person turned red. So yes, it does. It would work. So the next one is land parts. I just like to note them in the dictionary so that you know, like, is like a point of land. Because some of those are related. Like, is a nose or a beak or a point of land. Plant parts, some of those are a little different, right? But they function in a similar way to body parts. Then we get into these things that we've just learned, right? So like an independent base is what I like to call it. Things like daak, the key, right? Where it doesn't need a noun to belong to, but it can take a suffix. Dakte. A relational noun, it needs another noun to belong to, but it cannot take a suffix, right? Nak. You can't add a suffix to that. Nak means I got left behind, right? If you walked out of here without your keys, I could say, you walked off and left your keys behind. Then there's a relational base, which means it needs to belong to a noun and it can take a suffix. I just like to note them so that as we learn them, we sort of just remember these things. Needs to belong to a noun, yes or no. Can take a suffix, yes or no. So then we get suffixes that talk about things being at a certain point or moving in a direction. Then we get the verb. Now we got the adverb. That's almost everything in Tlingit. You also have particles, which are little things that sometimes do really big things, like cha and ch. Those are like true particles for me, like when I think about them, because they're so small, but they usually got to belong to something else. But if you just go in the dictionary and look up cha, we're going to see a whole bunch of different things, right? Well, maybe we'll just do that. So going into here, if we go up to the CH apostrophe, we're going to get cha, adusa, whoever, cha'an. Cha'an means like nonetheless. Right? Cha'an could also be just with it. Cha'aninach, kind, cha'dasa, whatever, whichever one, whenever, wherever, right? And then we get some of these things like chaqeqa would mean for nothing. And this one, it's like The verb root that's in there is to swing. So it's like I pushed it, it just swung right back in my direction. Different, all the time, like there's a whole bunch of these, right? All starting with cha, cut, right? So those are all the parts of speech in Tlingit. The idea here is just like build these categories of things, how the language works, and then start building your lists of things. I think we talked about this a little bit, how Tlingit likes to take things and smush them together to make a single word. And place names work really well for this, and so do clan names. Like you look at this teach, heen. What are those two things if we pull this apart? Teach.
Dog salmon?
Dog salmon. Heen. In this
River.
case, river. So teach heeni, which usually contracts to tich heeni. So there's a river right over by the search clinic here in Juneau, and that river is called Titchini. That's the name of that river. Every community usually has Qatini, Titchini. They usually have those around their communities. So if you add adi to that, then you get a contraction to Klinedi, and that's where that clan name comes from. So all of these clan names have to do with specific places. What about S'ik Nach? Do we know what those ones are? Black bear? Landform. I think of it as a fjord. It's like a long, narrow bay with steep sides. That's Nach. Whole bunch of clans that have them in their name, right? Qanach Adi, Qanach Tidi, Shipnach Adi, Tiknach Adi, because it's taken their name from a place. Right? And this is how clans work. This is how the names of clans work. Okay. So going through, maybe we'll end tonight with like a slightly different thing. Oh, did I switch? Oh, whoops, hold on. So one of the things that we're doing these days is we're color coding the whole verb. So I'm trying to color code the whole language, but there's so many parts, I'm like running out of colors. But one of the ideas here is to start looking at the verb, and when we pull it apart, it's like these are your main components of a Tlingit verb. A Tlingit verb is made up of these things. You have to have a stem and a classifier. Those two things are absolutely required. You cannot have a verb without those two things. So those are the two central parts of the verb. Then you can build on other things after that. Not all verbs have a subject, not all verbs have an object. Some have one, some have the other, some have both, some have neither. So we mark that stuff, because if we look at the verb and you don't see a subject there, you cannot add it in. This is how Tlingit verbs work. Some of them will have what we call a thematic prefix, and that is a noun that you put onto a verb. All of these things mean something, especially these ones in like category 2, because you can have up to 4 of them. The ones in category 2, j, hand, tu, inside a closed container, sa, the voice or the base of the neck, sh, the nose, da, around or about, ch, mouth, sh, head, sh, end of something. So like those all have meaning. Then you have this spot right here, which is where most of the action takes place. You want to move that into the perfective, you add this marker right here. You want to put it in future, You gotta have this thing plus that thing plus that thing. So it's a combination of these things that will pop up and push the verb into these other modes, right? So we use the word mode to talk about the verb starting to change. It's a future mode, perfective mode, imperfective mode. And we're gonna start talking about this stuff a little bit more, pulling these things apart so you could see them, then starting to teach you all the rules that go into making them. So a year from now, maybe, might be a year from now, you should be able to look up any single verb and put it into the perfective and change the subject and the object without very many errors. Like you should be able to predict that with very high accuracy. And then once you can start doing that, now you can start telling stories, you can start doing this stuff. And you can start, once you look up a verb, you're like, okay, now I know that verb. Now I know how to use it. Then we'll start looking at the future. Then we start looking at a few other things. And now you're getting more and more language use ability. But you have to always substitute this stuff with stories, with speeches, with making the language yourself as you're walking around, finding people to talk to. Thoughts or questions? Okay. So on Tuesday, we'll start by naming as many plants as we can, so you guys have a chance to talk a little bit more. Then we will move into Táakw. So we're going to listen to Robert Zuboff tell this story. We're going to read a short version of it, then a medium version of it, and then the full version of it. And that's going to be Tuesday and probably the week after that. And then we start moving towards like the wrap for the semester. So start thinking about your letter. That's your final for this class. And then we'll talk as well about things you can do over your 1 month break so that you don't want you to leave our language behind. Ḳukaháa.
Finish cheese.
Sheesh.
Sheesh.